Let's take a look at the video that Trump then played for people.
Nothing you can do. There's nothing this parliament can do. With or without you, people are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care. We can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not? We are going to occupy land. Yes. South Africa, occupy land. That's who we are.
Honorable member,
you want to do, you can withdraw my membership from this useless parliament.
This whiteness, we are cutting the throat of whiteness.
Shoot to kill, Yamasa, kill the Boer, the farmer, kill the Boer, the farmer. Brr, pa, pa, brr, pa. Shoot to kill, Yamasa, kill the Boer, the farmer, kill the Boer, the farmer. Brr, pa, pa, brr, pa, pa.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we have not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal call.
Cry babies.
Sizogoshaya uzotutulwa uliphuno sizogoshaya uzobaleka tu sizobatula bazobaleka tu sizobatula.
We will expropriate land without compensation, whether they like it or not. If they object, they can seek refuge in America.
Okay, so this is good too, yeah. So here's so this says each cross represents a white farmer who was murdered in the South, and some people still deny that white South Africans Boers are persecuted and say they don't deserve asylum because they are white. What say ye?
The guy in the red with the
beret
and so on. This guy is a scam artist. He inhabits popular themes, but he's corrupt. He has fleeced thousands of poor black people out of their savings by kind of create fake banks or whatever. Anything he appropriated is not going to the people, trust me. But also, he's kind of slipped. He's marginal, right? He's a demagogue who's doing his own theatrics. He splits with the ANC over access to the feeding trough, essentially. The ANC is pretty corrupt and has been for a long time. And he wants a bigger share, and that's where he creates his own party. Jacob Zuma, former president, so he is from the ANC, incredibly corrupt, charged with rape. He got off on a defense that would never have stood in many courts in many countries, who is basically, inhabiting a weird combination of populist to the left themes and populist to the right themes, and sort of engaging with Afrikaners and so on. But the song that he's singing is from the 1960s. And the Boer, in my struggle years as well, we sang plenty of songs about the Boers. We called the cops the Boers. The system was the Boers. That it wasn't farmers, it wasn't literally, it was a system of white supremacy that was personified by white policemen who were hitting us. And that was the Boers. So singing a song about how the Boers are going to run because we're going to speak whatever, that was in the 1960s and in the 70s, etc. Those are songs from an era of struggle, which, yes, was, there was violence, mostly by the system. So it's all taken kind of massively out of context.
These Afrikaner social movements actually took Julius Malema to court over those songs. And the Equality Court of South Africa, the Supreme Court of Appeal, and our equivalent of the Supreme Court, which is called the Constitutional Court, all ruled in his favor and basically said what Tony said. This is symbolism. This is not a literal interpretation about murdering farmers. The accusation here is that this is government policy. Julius Malema is not a member of the government. Tony's correct. He had a heyday. I mean, he's a complicated figure. I at least want to point this out. When he formed his party in 2013, people did follow him. I mean, they weren't all, obviously, whatever he's doing, There were genuinely people who thought, oh, he represents an alternative, because the state, Ramaphosa, by the way, was a director of the mining company in 2012 in August. People remember this, when the police murdered 34 miners at this mine in the northern part of South Africa called Marikana. So in response to that, this was Julius Malema's public argument. He broke with the ANC, formed this economic freedom fighters who kind of dress up like Chavistas when Chavez was still around. Tony's right, very radical proposals around the economy, around public goods, but it doesn't line up with how they act in real life. They did have a moment where they actually took on Zuma in the parliament by insisting that Zuma must pay up the money that he had fleeced from the state. So that's the guy. So, but he's not in government. His party has been declining. And he actually said this week, after the meeting happened, Ramaphosa came back to South Africa, Malema said, I am going to use this thing now to get some popularity back. But I want to say one other quick thing. I was talking to a friend about this week. So, okay, he has the right to sing this. He won the case. There's freedom of speech in South Africa. That is, it's protected by the Constitution. Right. I think politically there has to be a question which you ask, like, why do you need to sing this? Like, what's the point of singing it? We know it's symbolism. Another kind of society, and in which you do not want right-wing forces and entitled whites to constantly say, look, they're singing Kill the Boer, and then it gets picked up by Zuma, and by Trump. And unfortunately, it damages the country because it has real effects. That's a separate debate. But the point is, he's not part of government. This thing is protected by the Constitution. And so that's what made it ridiculous why Trump brought this up to see sort of decontextualized video and showing it in the White House.
But Sean, I think one thing that people need to understand is what Malema is doing is pointing to a very, very real grievance, which is basically all of the land in South Africa is stolen property, really. The farmland, if you go back into history, it's the colonizers' willingness to use violence to take the collectively farmed property of indigenous people and call it their own, their property, their farms. And there's been precious little redistribution because of the kind of deal that was made. And I think you see this in a lot of former, decolonized countries where property is respected. Property rights are enshrined in law by decolonizing parties, which means effectively you are legitimizing the gains that settler colonialism made at the expense of the people. If you don't have an answer to that, and the government in South Africa doesn't have an answer to that, the land hunger, the poverty, Malema comes along and he's like, we will appropriate, we will seize, we will. You can see how that resonates. The issue resonates, Malema doesn't. But the issue of land and redistributing it and redressing the very painful economic legacies of settler colonial apartheid is very real and very much unresolved.
You actually have a tweet that refers to this particularly. So you write, Trump's falsehoods about white farmers losing their quote unquote property reminded me to mention how South Africa's land became their property in the first place. The answer, the same way that black bodies became the property of white slavers, i.e. through violence. So can you expand on this and also explain to people, what is the policy vis-a-vis land ownership? Are white people being targeted? What is the basis of these claims or the non-basis?
72% of arable farmland in South Africa is owned by white people who constitute no more than 7% of the population. So that's the history. And they came to own that by the settler colonial conquest, in which the indigenous people pushed into smaller and smaller and smaller plots of land. Interestingly, where this differs from Israel, actually, is that the settler colonial forces push the indigenous people off their land. In Israel, it's like to get rid of them completely. In South Africa, it's to proletarianize them. It's to basically take a cashless economy and charge cash taxes. Basically, you push black people off their means of subsistence on the land to force them to come and work for white people on mines and farms. So that's for a different show, because the consequences of that are huge. Like the regime could never bomb Soweto without shutting down Johannesburg.
Right.
Just to add to what Tony's saying, so post-apartheid, the way to your question, like how does land reform work? Well, the Constitution basically protects the right to private property. So if you want to bring land reform, there is a policy called willing buyer, willing seller. That's pretty self-explanatory. Secondly, there is some expropriation. The thing that Trump was going on about, and which they kind of made into a spectacle or they played it up, is that the government updated an old law to allow for some form of expropriation. And the kind of expropriation, and they've explained this over and over again, it's very limited. It's nothing. It's like, hey, we need to build a road through here or something like that. The kind of expropriation you have in New York City or Connecticut or wherever. There's nothing egregious about this expropriation, which the sad part is, again, they're not doing this kind of land reform, deracializing the cities. I mean, one of the small things is everybody talks like we're only talking about farmland. The other part of this is what's known as the Group Areas Act, in which people's homes were expropriated in the cities, and the cities were made white and people were moved out to like the edges of the cities. The way it works is like there's been very little expropriation. You have to make a land claim. Personal story, my father is from a beautiful part of the city where there's a National Botanical Garden. They were descendants of slaves. They lived on this land. They were forcefully removed. Well, he didn't because they could probably, but he was a squatter. And his family, the people who made a claim in 1995, they only now finally this year heard that they're going to go back and somebody's going to build houses for them. So if you left in 1969 and you were, I don't know, 50 years old already or 60, by the time the claim was made, or now by the time you have the right or the potential to go live there, you're already dead. That's the kind of thing that Malema sort of tries to exploit when he does this kind of singing.